We'll be continuing with Chapter 7 of the Oversoul 7 Trilogy series. We're on the education of Oversoul 7. The further descent of Proteus and the rest of Yosef's dream. Proteus's small living nodule floated so gently he went camping at home that you simply forgot that it rested on air. Now it was only a few feet up from the ground. The collapsible steps reached down to the rocky earth, but here the air currents pushed it every which way, and when Proteus looked out through the small transparent window holes, Earth's opaque darkness stretched out as far as he could see. He sat on an air pillow, eating his late meal. He was allotted himself a minimum diet of supper pills washed down by water. He'd been under the impression that on the real Earth it rained often and abundantly, providing natural water that didn't even need to be recycled. He knew it didn't rain on time as it did at home, but he'd been sure it rained every day or so. For that reason he hadn't carried much water with him, and now he thought of his plastoid sack hanging open outside from his nodule. If it rained, he'd hear it filling, and try to make sure that it didn't spill. Sitting alone with all that dark space around him made him uneasy. Not afraid, he told himself. There was a difference. Actually, he missed the gentle dim illumination that passed for night in the floating city, even though his camping nodule lighted itself up automatically when the sun went down. Besides this, he was becoming worried about the nodule itself. It was drifting some, and he tried not to think what might happen if a really strong earth wind began to blow. Could it rip the nodule to bits? It wasn't made to stand free air currents. But what if it drifted? Unless he got tangled up in trees, what could happen? Still, it might be wise to take another look around, he thought. Unhappily, the sky elevator ride hadn't frightened him in the same way that going outside did now. For one thing, he trusted the sky elevator, but the nodule floor wobbled when he stood up, opened the door, and went out to the tiny platform. The steps were flying out horizontally in the air, and the breeze seemed determined to pull his hair out by the roots. He still found unsteady air scary, and his eyes stung. You could fall and break a leg, he thought, holding on. With his motion, the nodule flipped. Proteus fell off, sprawling on the ground. Desperately, he sprang to his feet, trying to catch the waving steps. They eluded him, as if on purpose, he thought, until finally he jumped higher than he ever had in his life, grabbed the lowest step, and just hung on. His weight pulled the nodule down low enough so that he could climb aboard. Half crying, out of breath, sick with relief, he went inside and drew the steps in after him, where they disappeared beneath the couch in storage position. The wind, which actually had been a slight breeze, grew stronger. Bumpily, the illuminated nodule drifted through the air, with Proteus inside, looking out, afraid that he'd run into an area of trees or shrubs that could damage the nodule beyond repair. He'd taken to talking to the nodule in the last few hours. Now he said, "We can make it. Don't you worry." As he was chattering, his eyes fell on the small TV unit. But there would be no stations here, he told himself, for the 10th time still. He turned the set on and just sat there staring at the glowing empty screen, until finally he fell into an uneasy sleep. The next thing he knew, he was wide awake. The time dial showed that he'd slept for several hours, but something had awakened him. What was it? It took him several moments before he realized that a pattern was trying to form on the TV screen. Quickly he leaned forward, but the pattern wouldn't stabilize. Instead, there was static. His excitement grew, and suddenly the static turned into words. "Turn off your illumination at once, then leave your nodule," the voice said. The patterns jumped, but no images formed. What? Are you talking to me? Who are you? Proteus shouted. Repeat. Proteus, turn off your illumination, then leave your nodule. Search parties are looking for you. We can't take the chance of using this channel any longer. If you receive this message, follow our directions. Wait for us. We're friends. You have nothing to be worried about. How do you know who I am? Who are you? Where are the search parties? But the screen turned opaque. Proteus tried the other channels, but they were dead. For a moment he thought he'd imagined the whole thing. Who was out there? What did they want? Should he do what they said? The bumpy air was rushing all around the nodule. Any second now it could crash to the ground, ruined. He'd collapse it because of that to save it, he thought. Then, finding a hiding place and see what happened. He couldn't turn the illumination off anyhow as long as the nodule was inflated. The lighting was automatic. He looked out again this time, searching for what he'd hoped to avoid earlier, an area of trees, only with a clearing to settle down in. It was a good hour before the nodule drifted close to any brush at all. Even then, Proteus hesitated. He was under surveillance. He couldn't get over it. He'd seen no signs of anyone, and he certainly hadn't seen any Earth copters, such as a search party from home might use here. The brush was coming closer. Quickly he grabbed his survival kit and pressed the nodule collapse lever. Holding his breath, he came outside on the platform again, down the wobbly steps to the ground. The nodule shuddered, wrinkled, and collapsed beside him. A small white plastoid bag the size of a valise? I don't know what that is. He yanked his belongings out of the clearing and ducked into the shrubbery. There were short, stubby trees, brambles, and vines. Proteus ran as fast as he could, his head down, his camp shoes automatically shooting out their small circles of light from his toes, illuminating the ground beneath his feet. They were a present from his mother, a luxury, hardly a necessity at the camps he attended with their gently lighted grounds. But here he paused. Best not to think of his parents, he thought. Not now. His feet hurt already. The shoes would wear out quickly on this uneven surface, but he felt excited. At least things were happening, and he was on his own. He was scared, he finally admitted, but even that was exhilarating. He felt hunted, but very free. Then a new worry bothered him. Suppose the people who contacted him were really from home and trying to trick him. Still, Proteus thought they'd be more apt to send out women on the search, and the voice he heard had been masculine. He looked up through the thicket at the black sky, and through that, despite everything, he wouldn't be caught and sent home. He never felt so like himself before. Suddenly Proteus stopped, his shoe lights illuminating the beginning of a hill, or a drop of some kind. Cautiously, he inched forward, then stopped again, staring. He was on the high brim of a strange, round hill. Within were dark, curious shapes like buildings that were situated a good 30 feet down. Actually, he was on the edge of a circular valley, he saw. Quickly he found a more inclined area and began to make his way down. There were no hills in the floating city. He wasn't used to climbing. Several times he fell. When he was halfway down, he stopped, staring through the darkness. As he did, streaks of light ribboned through the clouds. His first sight of dawn. He looked up, marveling at the way dawn happened, all by itself, not prearranged signals as at home. He knew all the scientific reasons, but again the phenomenon at first sight was amazing. The sky shivered. Clumps of cloud turned from gray-black to gray to puffs to perfect muted colors which themselves began to change the moment they appeared. For a moment, until he looked back, he'd forgotten the scene below. Now, in the growing light, the buildings sprang clearly upward from the litter of ruins of such an extent that Proteus stepped back involuntarily. And what ruins! There were portions of sprawling walls, high pillars such as he'd seen in some videotapes, and piles of rubble. A few tall white towers still stood, half covered now with vines and foliage. Delighted, forgetting everything else, Proteus ran down the hill as fast as he could go. The rocky ground hurt his feet. Brambles caught his clothes. He hardly noticed. Twice he dropped his survival kit, picked it up automatically, and ran on. What kind of people had lived there, and when? The area was being worked. Some machinery stood silently nearby. Then off to the side he saw buildings, ruins in better shape than elsewhere, that looked inhabited. Rough material hanging at the windows. Perhaps laborers or archaeologists stayed there. Cautiously, Proteus stopped, then set out in the opposite direction, walking as quietly as he could. It couldn't take him long to come to the largest rock platform in the middle of the dig. As soon as he approached, a small dog suddenly ran out from behind a broken statue of a man. Proteus knew it was a dog, though he'd only seen them in zoos, so he ran after it. The dog never barked, though it might. Proteus thought suddenly, and awakened who might ever be sleeping at the dig instead. Could he be mistaken? No, the dog was trying to lead him somewhere. It kept wagging its stubby tail and running to him, then back to the statue. Finally Proteus followed. A round hole was visible beside the statue, and the dog ran down a flight of stairs beneath. Proteus couldn't tell how deep the hole was, for the stairs turned, but already the dog had disappeared. An open invitation? A trained dog? Did it belong to the man who'd contacted him on TV? Was it a trap? Proteus's arguments with himself were only academic, and he knew it. Already he had taken his first steps down. A trap door within the earth, on the other side of the surface. He never really expected to see any such thing. After traveling down the sky elevator to the ground, what an opportunity now to descend even further inside it. But where had the dog gone? When Proteus went down perhaps 10 of the stone steps, a noise attracted his attention just as the light suddenly changed. Whipping around, he was just in time to see the hole close above him. A round arc of blackness shut out the morning sky. It was only then that he realized that the steps were dimly lighted. Simultaneously, he wondered if the statue above had changed position and stood now solidly atop the hole. Again the excitement conquered his fear. Almost. Only now and then his scalp prickled, and the blood pounded alarmingly loud in his ears. For one thing, he'd never smelled such odors before. A mixture of minerals and moisture and thickly packed dirt long untouched, a musty yet evocative pungency that kept reminding him that he was actually on the other side of Earth's surface. The passageway turned. Again Proteus wondered where the dog was. Insects dashed out of the dimness into the circle of light cast by his camping shoes. Proteus recoiled, but they scurried away. Here and there, large stones littered the steps, holes in the rocky walls showing where they had fallen, and often the walls were slimy with moisture. Often the steps ended after another turn. There silently sat the dog, tail wagging, eyes friendly. Was it mute? Proteus wondered. To the right was a door. It opened easily. Proteus found himself in a large room without windows, dimly lighted from the ceiling. The entire area was filled with long tables loaded with tools, stone busts, and piles of debris. It was an archaeological site then. Proteus hadn't realized that such a work was carried on this far underground. Maybe they'd let him stay and learn while he worked. But then another idea came to him. The dog had crossed the floor and was waiting for him at the other door at the far end of the room. It was all too pat, Proteus thought. Suppose there was a reward out for him and the archaeologists were going to turn him over to his parents, or a search party. He couldn't even imagine seeing his mother, but the thought of seeing his father surprised him. He felt a pang of loneliness, an unexpected rush of tenderness that he instantly tried to hide from himself. He adapted a jaunty stance and opened the door. The dog rang into the small room on the other side, and he followed. A creaky, funny old elevator. Instantly the door closed. The tiny room moved downward, the bumps and squeaks as if it hadn't been used for centuries. It stopped. The dog began to bark impatiently, as if it had just been given a voice. The door opened and the dog ran straight out into the arms of a man who stood not 3 feet away. "Good job, Winter," the man said, picking the dog up. The man had brown hair, thick brown brows, a humped nose, and wore loose flowing overalls and a long-sleeved shirt or blouse. But it was his manner that caught Proteus's attention at once. He never met a man with such a presence, with such an easy yet assured air of friendly command. "My name is Widow," the man said, "and you're Proteus. You've caused quite a bit of concern, though you didn't know it, of course. You could have ruined everything." "I could have? Ruined what? You're an archaeologist, aren't you? Are you the man who sent me the message? Are there really search parties out for me?" Proteus had so many questions that he didn't know where to start. At the same time, he noted the long stone table at one end of the bare room, the clay tables lined up on raised wooden platforms, and the murals in various stages of completion that lined the walls. A man named Window. A man named Window. Oh, his name is Window, not Widow. And isn't a man named Window. I never knew of anyone with a name like that, he said. And isn't Winter a funny name for a dog? We have names that have meaning to us. I'm Window because I can see through things sometimes, the man said. And he found the dog in the wintertime. You're in the dig of the tellers, but there'll be plenty of time to explain. Right now you're in danger to all of us, drawing search parties in this direction. Usually the floaters leave us alone." "The floaters?" Proteus said. Your people," Window said with a sardonic grunt. "Now come along with me. I hope you like what you see, because you're going to be around here for some time." Proteus looked around uneasily now. "You mean I'm a prisoner?" he asked. Window shrugged and smiled. "Definitions are funny things. I wouldn't define your position here as that of a prisoner, no. But for your own good, as well as ours, I believe that you'll voluntarily agree to limit your experience to the dig of the tellers for a while." Oversoul 7 and Yosef had watched Proteus ever since he awakened from sleep and heard the teller's voice on the television set. Now they stood invisible in one corner of the room. Yosef said enraged, "What's going on? What are they going to do with that boy? Why don't you do something? You can't you? If you didn't help him when he fell out of his strange bubble, I don't suppose you'll do anything now, though." He paused and shivered. And that foul tunnel, or whatever it was. "Can't you be quiet?" Oversoul 7 said. "You've done nothing but yell since we started. I knew I shouldn't have taken you along." "Yell? Being dragged through the air by the hair of my head almost? I've never had a dream in my life like this before. I suppose it's because I'm half-starved." "In a way it is," 7 said. "It clears the mind." "Clears the mind?" You call this clearing the mind? Yosef yelled. Who's that? That soldier or whoever it is. Seven looked to where Yosef was pointing. He's just another hallucination of yours. Why do you keep doing that? I told you, if he disappears, you'll know he's not real. At least not to anyone else. If he stays put, then he's part of physical reality or mass hallucination. Can't you keep that straight? While they were talking, Proteus and Window left the room. They're going, Yosef said. Aren't you going to follow them? Proteus never even knows when I'm around, Seven said, but I can't stay here any longer. I think he'll be all right. I'm sure he will. He's so resourceful. What's wrong with that? Yosef said. It didn't sound like a compliment. You're not supposed to question me like that, Seven said. Don't try to switch roles with me. Come on, I'm taking you back. But that boy, Yosef said, at the mercy of God knows what. That's your trouble. You always exaggerate, Seven said. He sighed, touched Yosef on the arm, and thought of Yosef's bedroom. This time Yosef only felt a flash of air, a whoosh of sound, and then a strange scrambled up sensation. The next thing he knew, he was lying above the bed looking down at his own body, or all he could see it, bundled in a hump beneath the blankets. Is that me? He said. I've been out all over everywhere without my body. The realization terrified him. He froze. Turn around, Oversoul 7 said. Your head's at your feet. You've got to line up with your body. I can't. I don't know how to. Suppose I don't get back in. Getting back in is the easiest of all, Seven said. You just have to want to, and I suggest that you give some thought to solving some of your other problems. In fact, what you've seen tonight should help you considerably, but this time it's up to you. I've given you the ingredients for something, but you have to use them. Now get back inside your body. Just drop in. Drop in, Yosef asked. Seven sighed and gave Yosef a slight nudge that lined him up with his physical body. Go ahead. Yosef stared at him distrustfully, but he dutifully tried to do what Seven suggested. A funny falling sensation rushed through him. In panic, his eyes flew open. He was in bed. The room was perfectly normal, except for a Toyman soldier who stood in the corner. You forgot to dismiss your hallucination, Seven called helpfully. He himself disappeared. Go away, Yosef yelled, and the soldier vanished before his eyes. He sat up, shaking and sweating, and lit the lantern. What a nightmare, he thought. Tomorrow he was going to start a painting for the Hosenstaffs. No matter what it was, the lack of food was driving him out of his mind. Suddenly he jumped to his feet, fully alert. Scenes from his dream rushed into consciousness. He saw those old ruins rising up from the gray dawn. What an idea for a painting, he thought. Already the experience with Seven was disappearing, first into a dream, then into the memory of a dream, then into the feeling that he'd had a dream that he'd forgotten. Only a clear image of the ruins remained. Yosef lit another lantern and began a quick preliminary sketch of the circular hill and ruins at the dig of the tellers. As the charcoal lines outlined the scene, he had the weirdest feeling that the place was somehow familiar, as if he'd been there once and forgotten. That's it for Chapter 7.